Hey, this is Kent Morlan and my friend Ray. We're here for the Kent and Ray show again today. We were talking about what we were going to talk about, and I suggested we talk about the tragedy of the commons. And because it has so much applicability to the modern world. And the tragedy of the commons, as I understand it, is basically if you have a resource that everybody gets to use to the extent that they want to use it, humans have a tendency to abuse that and destroy the commons for everybody else. And for example, in the North Atlantic, the cods, what was called the Grand Banks, in the 19th century, was a source of cod, and they basically fished it out. There's no Grand Bank, no. And then the sardines off the west coast in the 30s, they caught sardines until there weren't any sardines anymore. The other thing, another common is the atmosphere, so you can just put crap into the atmosphere if you don't have an EPA. And of course, we're trashing the oceans with plastic because the oceans are common. And there was a article in the Wall Street Journal today about low Earth orbit and how it's being trashed by humans doing stupid stuff close in the low Earth orbit. And they made the movie that Sandra Bullock was in. What was the name of that movie?
It's called Gravity.
Gravity. Mm-hmm. And she and George Clooney were on some sort of a space station, and they got this warning that they were going to be hit by trash. And of course, in the movie, you could see the stuff flying toward them, but in reality, those objects are traveling at extremely high speeds, and if you were hit with a piece of space junk the size of a marble, it would go through you before you ever knew it was coming. And I understand that the space station is designed to withstand some of those kinds of hits, but even it is at risk of being damaged or destroyed if it gets hit. You need to move over. You're not showing up in the picture, Ray. You're hiding out there.
Well, you know, the space station has had to dodge a couple of potential hits in recent months, and I think it's a real problem. It's in my book, and it's in the class of things that are solvable with some effort, some care, and a different set of rules. But it's a real problem.
How do you do that when you have 200 nations and you have the Americans, the French, the Indians, the Chinese, the Russians all shooting stuff into space, and there's no requirement of them? For example, the Russians created a huge problem by deciding they were going to test some weapon. They set a satellite out, and then they shot and blew it up and reduced it to junk flying around at 17,000 miles an hour. And they also send these satellites up, and they don't have any way to get them back down. I mean, gravity eventually pull all that stuff back to the Earth, but you could be looking at very long periods of time before that kind of stuff burns up in the atmosphere, right?
Well, you know, the Chinese may be the biggest offenders. I mean, they twice in the last, I think, 8 months, they've allowed a booster, integral part of their space station construction and assembly program.
You're disappearing off the screen again.
To should we move this camera a little?
You need to move you, not the camera.
So the Chinese are, you know, I mean, they're obviously not the only ones, but these are large objects that they're not taking any care with, and you know, I mean, they've been lucky on 2 occasions. On one occasion, the booster, the sizable secondary booster crashed into some rural area, I think in Afghanistan, and then recently one went down in the ocean. So
well, the oceans are 72% of the planet's surface, so you got a 3 out of 4 chance that something that comes down is going to end up in the water.
Right.
and then much of the rest of the earth is basically uninhabited. Gobi Desert, Sahara Desert, blah blah blah. So the likelihood that a person would be hit is pretty small. Right?
Yeah, which is arguably why it hasn't happened. I mean, humans have been hurling things into orbit since the late 50s with Sputnik.
Right.
So.
But the bigger problem, I think, is you're going to get so much trash up there that it's going to be dangerous to leave the planet and go to the moon, or you want them to go to Mars, which I think is a waste of time. I think it's a waste of time to go to the moon, for that matter.
Well, Kent, my outlook is, and you and I have talked about this a million times.
Yeah,
man.
but we're talking about it again.
Here's the thing. It's like I would submit to you that the space program has been a gigantic boon for humanity.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, the technology that's been developed as a result of NASA's stuff. Oh, unbelievable benefits. But the point about it is, I know you've told me that you would sign up to go to Mars in a minute, even if you'd never come back. Well, and of course, anybody that goes out there is not going to come back in all likelihood. Matt Damon did that movie called The Martian.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first thing, I go in, I sit down, with my box of popcorn and a soft drink, and that movie starts. In the first minute, they discredit the whole movie by having a storm on Mars that is so destructive. Well, there's not enough atmosphere on Mars to have such a storm.
And there isn't enough wind intensity or enough atmospheric density. Having said that, though, a lot of the stuff that happens thereafter is credible. And,
he couldn't have raised. He couldn't have raised his own food on the one that I really thought was interesting, where they were having the conversations, because if you were on Mars and you said hi to Ray on the Earth, 5 minutes later Ray would get the message, right?
Well, they incorporated that.
And then you say hi back, and you have to wait for 5 minutes to get the response.
Right. Well,
so any communications basically would be tremendously laborious, right?
Well, it would be awkward, but we're talking minutes here. I mean, Mars, the average.
It's 200 million miles, isn't it?
No, it's about 142 million. That's the orbital typical.
Well, it depends on where the Earth is in its orbit relative to where Mars is in its orbit.
Right, but
we're inside the orbit of Mars, right?
That's right, but let's remember that beam of light that originates on the sun's surface,
186,000 miles per second, isn't it?
Gets here in 8 minutes.
From the sun.
But
that's only 90 million miles.
Yeah, well, it's 93 million miles.
Oh, okay.
93 million.
I stand corrected.
And mostly the distance between here, the Earth, and and Mars at any distance in their orbital alignment is, it's I forget the average, but it's not too much more than that.
Well,
and they did represent the delay at points in the film. But I mean, you can emulate the quality of Martian soil.
Well, we know it has a lot of iron in it, because it's called the red planet.
Right.
The reason it's called the red planet, and a lot of people don't know this, that I sneak up on people every once in a while about it. I say, you know why the rocks are red in the American West, or why the dirt is red in Oklahoma City? And they all go, no, I don't know. No. I said, well, it's iron. It's iron oxide.
Same reason much of the Martian surface is
that
red.
means at one point there's something that caused the iron in the planet Mars to oxidize.
Mm-hmm.
And normally you would think oxygen, right? And now they think it had water at one time or another, right? No, and they may still have water under the surface.
It may have enormous quantities of water.
Right.
It looks as though it probably does. But the other thing is that they've got one of the instruments on one of the probes has a little, how do you say, in situ experiment designed to extract oxygen from the Martian soil, and in another point concentrated amounts from the Martian atmosphere, with good results. So it's not a picnic, but there are ways you can extract what you would probably need for an extended stay.
It's a hole in the ground to crawl into.
You also need a cavern or two, or materials.
Because the Mars doesn't have a magnetic core like the Earth.
It does not.
And as a result, it is bathed in solar radiation
continuously.
all the time.
Right.
Yeah, basically, be like putting yourself in a low-grade microwave, right? Isn't that true?
Yes, it's a very.
So as soon as you get there, you got to dig a hole and crawl in it, or find someplace where you're not on the surface of Mars. That's another thing. In the Martian, all that stuff was setting out on the surface, in these modules that he was living in, the ones that he had to blew up, and then he had to jerry-rig it so it could stay there, I don't know where his oxygen came from either. And the plants that he was growing, and potatoes, wasn't it?
He had potatoes and some other stuff. I mean, that, they took some liberties, I agree, at the outset.
It's also 60 below zero there all the time.
Oh, it's not warm. Well, not all the time. It depends on where you are.
Oh, I had a question for you. This guy belongs to an astronomy club. I don't. But I was explaining to two little girls who are the children of a woman that works for me today about the first day of winter, right? And December 22nd, or thereabouts, 21st, 22nd. And I was showing them that the sun is zooming along at tens of thousands of miles per second. It's really hot rodding down. And the Earth is, of course, going around the sun, so the perihelion, which occurs in June, which isn't it in June, when basically the Earth is the closest to the sun in June. And then the sun starts running off and leaving it. So the result is that the orbit of the Earth is an oval, right, or an ellipse, basically. Mm-hmm. So in December 22nd, the Earth is as far away from the sun as it gets, and everybody says 93 million miles away. Well, obviously the Earth is closer to the sun in July than it is in December.
Well, it's also the orientation of the Earth on its axis.
Well, it always is at the same angle, but how it's pointed at the sun.
The incidence with the sun.
Yeah,
right,
because when you're in July, the top of the Earth is pointed toward the sun, and in December it is pointed away from the sun, right?
Right.
I used to think it actually tilted, and had somebody demonstrate to me that I was ignorant, which was true, and now I'm less ignorant than I was, but I'm still ignorant.
Well, it's hard to visualize it. That's true. But
it doesn't wobble. It stays at the same angle all the time, except that angle is oriented toward the sun as it goes around. It points toward the sun or away from the sun. Right. But
go ahead.
No, we're just having this discussion.
Well,
about
you've got
space. We're talking about space.
Obviously, you've got the as you alluded to earlier, you've got this impetus that has caused us, arguably, to produce or to speed up the development of technologies that have many applications. That's one of the benefits.
TV,
GPS, all kinds of stuff. But also, I would submit to you that the weather satellites have saved billions and millions of people since.
Yeah, sure. Just like, you take this iPhone, Ray's got a better one than I do. Of course, he's a privileged person when it comes to that. But, you know, I was giving a lesson to these little girls, and there's my iPhone, and I've got a compass on it. And so I had it in the car, and we were driving down the street, and I was saying to them, you know what these numbers down at the bottom mean? 36, 8, 60, N, 95, 59, 25, W. And of course, these kids are 10 or 11 years old, they didn't have a clue. And I said, well, that's longitude and latitude, right? And as we were driving along, the numbers changed. And the point is there's 3 satellites that communicate with this phone all the time. And so the phone knows where it is. Probably at this style, probably within a block, right?
Yeah,
but you can
like
get
that.
within meters with the military stuff, and that's why the high rams that they have over in the Ukraine that we give the Ukrainian army can put a explosive within a 10 square foot space at 50 miles using GPS technology and guidance systems. And this is all space stuff, right? And of course, television and this stuff is all based on our buddy Isaac Newton, who came up with calculus in 1680 something, which he developed in his spare time while hanging out at the house during the occurrence of the plague in England, right? He also came up with the laws of physics when he was at it.
It's a productive.
He was 26 when
season,
he was
yeah.
26 when he did that. You know, I'd hardly figured out how to count when I was 26. Maybe a little better than that, but I wasn't very well educated at age 26 compared to what I am now. But you know, we owe so much to Isaac Newton that people don't have any clue. Like you couldn't ever send a spacecraft to the moon or to Mars or any place else without calculus.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, you can calculate the trajectories to ever get there. And I tried to read a book on calculus, and it was all math to me, right?
Well, yeah.
I kind of figured out, you know, I kind of figured out how it works, but of course I can't do very much of anything with it. And but anyhow, I think we're going to be dispossessed. No, you have to use that one.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Oh, we did. Ray and I are in the big conference room, and 3 people just walked in to need to have a meeting in another conference room here at my office, so they were amenable to going in the library where all the books are to have their meeting, so they were cool. But you know, back to the tragedy of the commons is that we humans, while we might be really smart,
Mm-hmm.
we tend not to be very wise, right?
Well, I think sometimes we can't imagine that an obnoxious little habit is going to become a hurdle to something on a much larger scale than that society hadn't really imagined. I mean, you know, at the beginning of the space age.
Well, look what we're doing to the mouth of the Mississippi River. There's a big section of the Gulf of Mexico down there that has no life in it at all. And it's because we're putting chicken litter and fertilizer overwhelming the Mississippi River drainage basin is huge. Probably the best piece of agricultural real estate in the world. And we over-fertilize it to maximize how much grain we get out of it. And as a result, we're destroying life in the Gulf of Mexico, which
To
is
what
a
extent?
commons, which again is a commons. Right?
It's a commons problem. To what extent do you attribute what I guess I would call a piece of religious sentiment, i.e., that man is the dominion of the earth and all the animals?
Bullshit.
Well, of course it is, but
Well, of course,
that's
I'm the
one of the
atheist. Why would I
drivers.
believe God said that He made made the earth for man, because I don't
Well,
even believe in
it's
God.
like
Right?
it's like, you know, you don't have to be an adherent to, you know, the specifics of some religious doctrine to be an thrall. I mean, most people believe that
Yep.
humans can do anything they want to animals and to the planet, you know, without penalty. I mean, most people until very recently. And the scale of things that humans were doing, for the most part, in even the recent past, really had arguably a trivial impact, although there are exceptions to that.
Well, my friend Ray here is a vegetarian. And he has a perfectly legitimate reason for being a vegetarian. I don't.
Well, actually, I've got three or four. One is health. One is health. Health.
Okay.
It's a lot easier, folks, to eat without eating materials packed with antibiotics and growth serums and all of this other crap. But the B is that we treat animals, the food stock, very poorly.
It depends. Like my family is in the ranching business, and they treat their animals very well indeed.
And your family is an absolute total outlier.
Well, most ranchers, the people who produce the steers that go in, once they get to a certain size, and my family sells them, the quality of the life of the animal goes down, because then they take them and the next thing they do with them, they're out in Kansas on the wheat grounds munching away, you know. That's not bad, all it's cold. But eventually they end up in feedlots, and when they're in feedlots, they constrict their movements, and when they constrict their movements, then they overfeed them and they give them antibiotics. You know, I think all confined feeding operations are inhumane, and I will agree with that, right?
Yeah, and they're incubators for disease, and they're arguably the end of our antibiotic regimen. More, you know this, more antibiotics are allocated to ag than to human medicine.
I agree, but you know, we have this problem here, this tragedy of the commons, in that Tyson, the chicken industry, and the turkeys that are raised in eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas have completely polluted all of the drainage shed down into the Arkansas River, and there's been a lawsuit pending over in the federal courthouse here in Tulsa that Greg Frizzell is presiding over. He won't make a decision in it that's adverse to the poultry industry, and he's drinking the water, right? His family is too. We're all drinking the water here, and it's polluted by chicken manure, right?
Big time.
Okay.
Big time.
Then you know, and then look what they do to hogs. You know, a hog is the smartest animal on a farm, smarter than dogs, horses, cattle. They're really smart animals, and they raise the sows in pens where they can't move around, and then they take the babies and they compact them into these small pieces and just feed the crap out of them to produce a maximum amount of pounds of flesh per pound. It's about 4 to 1. They have to give them 4 pounds of food for every pound of meat that they produce. So he's right about all of this, right?
Well, I
had a hamburger
moral
this
outrage.
afternoon, and I liked it a lot. Right?
Well, see, I don't eat hamburgers.
And you know, John Denver said he could be a vegetarian, except it's hard to pass up a good taco, right? but you know, I think let's go back. We're you know, Ray and I kind of get off the track sometimes. But for example, I go back to the idea that we humans are probably the smartest animals that have ever lived on the planet. I don't think there's any question about it, right? And we can we've done amazing things. You know, we invent television sets, cameras, you know, vaccines for viral illnesses, spacecraft, automobiles. If you look at the modern world, you know, I have a picture of my grandmother in about 1906 or 1907 in a buggy, right? I knew a guy when I was a teenager that got drafted into the First World War who rode in a stagecoach to go off to the First World War. So when you look, that was only 104 or 5 years ago. And the airplane dates to 1903, and now we're going around at 600 miles an hour. People fly all over the place. And the airplane is another example of polluting the commons. Jet airplanes are tremendously damaging to the atmosphere. So we're real smart, we humans, but we lack wisdom.
Well, what we lacked for a long time was any understanding of the connection between what we were doing and the state of play in terms of critical elements of our environment.
Well, but
Water, air, the
humans
rest.
couldn't do very much damage to the earth until we got up to the kind of numbers we're talking about
Until
now.
the industrial age.
Well, if you say the Industrial Revolution started in 1760 with the invention of steam engine, there were only 1 billion people on the planet in 1830. My parents were born in 1920, and there were 2 billion on the planet, and now we're at 8 billion. And then most people think we're going to go to close to 10 billion by 2050, and then it may turn. There's a tremendous loss of population in China and many of the industrial nations of the northern hemisphere in particular. But we are, and I want to tell a story about this. When I was in the Air Force, we had to take hygiene training, and the sergeant that taught it came out, and he had this mess kit, and he held this mess kit. You know what that is? Yes, Sergeant, that's a mess kit. I said, right. You know what the number one rule in using a mess kit is? He said, no, Sergeant. He said, don't crap in it, right? Well, you know what the earth is?
It's a mess kit.
It's our mess kit. You know what we're doing to it? We're crapping in it. Mother Nature is going to punish us for what we're doing to the ocean, to the atmosphere, to the water.
Well, there are a handful of people.
Don't mean to be too negative here, but
well, it's certainly the case. There are a couple of 3 or 4 people who live and breathe and talk on this planet who are unreasonable combinations of astrophysicists and philosophers.
right.
And one of them says that the reason why we haven't detected extraterrestrials.
They don't want to have anything to do with us.
No, that's not what he says. He says it's because most societies, they arrive at this turning point where they're using fossil fuels, and they either manage their way out of it and change their behavior, or their planets become cauldrons and they are extinct.
Well, sure. What's wrong with Venus, for example, is it has real high CO2 content in its atmosphere.
Yes,
It's 800
so the
degrees.
surface temperature
It's
is 800 degrees.
We are at risk, in my opinion, of cooking this place, which means we're going to cook ourselves. We humans are so smart that we may very well destroy all life on this planet. Now, he believes we're going to come to our own rescue. We're going to come up with some sort of technological solution for this. But there's no
techno-political. It has to be political also.
Well, but how are you going to stop people from throwing plastic bags into the oceans?
Give them something other than plastic.
How do you stop 200 countries from all of them getting rid of plastic that is not biodegradable?
Well, it's a daunting problem, but only about 20 of them are material.
20 countries?
Yeah.
Well,
they're
sure.
the big producers.
The United States is what, the 3rd or 4th most populous country in the world?
5th.
China, India, us, Indonesia, right?
5th or 6th, something.
Yeah.
Who knows?
We're 4% of the population of the earth, and we produce 25% of the pollution. We are crapping in our mess kit. Have a great day. Be happy.